The morning I realized I had become invisible was a Tuesday in March, 18 months after my husband died. My name is Emma Sullivan. I'm 64 years old, and for 42 years I was somebody's wife, somebody's partner, somebody's reason to come home. Then William, my Bill, had a heart attack in our kitchen while making his famous Sunday pancakes, and just like that, I became nobody. That's not self-pity talking. That's just the truth of widowhood that nobody warns you about. You don't just lose your husband. You lose the person who noticed when you got a haircut. The person who knew you took your coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream. The person who made you feel seen. Day 547. That's how long Bill had been gone when this story really began. Yes, I still counted. I couldn't help it. Every morning I woke up in that tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis, and the first thing my mind did was calculate the distance between now and the last time I heard his voice. The apartment was nothing like the house we'd shared for 30 years. That house had a garden where Bill grew tomatoes and a porch swing where we'd watch thunderstorms roll in across the prairie. This apartment was so small I could stand in the living room and touch the kitchen counter with one hand and the bedroom door with the other. But it was mine, paid for with what was left after the medical bills ate through our savings, after the funeral costs, after the life insurance that barely covered the debt. My daughter Jenny lived in Portland and called once a month when she remembered. My son Michael had his own family in Houston, his own problems, his own life. I didn't blame them. Children grow up and grow away. That's the natural order of things. So I did what any desperate widow with a bad hip and outdated job skills would do. I got a job. The Good Shepherd Senior Center needed a part-time receptionist. $12 an hour, 25 hours a week. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the lights on and give me a reason to get dressed in the morning. And honestly, after 18 months of silence, I would have worked for free just to hear another human voice. Every morning, I took the number 17 bus from my apartment to the senior center. The route went through downtown Minneapolis, and I always got off 2 stops early so I could walk the rest of the way. Doctor's orders good for the hip, he said. But really, I needed the fresh air. I needed to feel like I was still part of the world, even if the world had mostly forgotten about me. That's how I first saw him. He sat on the same bench outside the public library every single morning. An older black man with white hair and kind eyes wearing a faded green jacket that had seen better decades. In front of him was a small paper cup. He never called out to passers-by. He never asked for money. He just sat there quiet and dignified, watching the world go by. Something about him reminded me of my father, maybe the way he held his back straight, despite his circumstances, or the gentle way he nodded at people who walked past, even the ones who pretended not to see him. The first time I stopped, I almost didn't. I was running late, and I had exactly $6 in my wallet, 4 for lunch and 2 for emergencies. But something made my feet slow down, and before I knew it, I was standing in front of his bench. He was reading a book. That's what caught my attention. Not just any book, A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I'd been a school teacher before I retired early to take care of Bill. Seeing a homeless man reading a book about the hidden stories of ordinary Americans, it stopped me cold. "That's a good book," I said, dropping a $5 bill into his cup. "My lunch money. I'd figure something out." He looked up at me, and I saw his eyes clearly for the first time. Warm brown, intelligent, with a sadness that ran deep but didn't define him. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. His voice was gentle, educated. "Do you know what Zinn says about ordinary people? He says the real history isn't written by kings and presidents. It's written by the nameless ones, the people the textbooks never mention." I stood there surprised by the depth of his response. Were you a teacher?" He smiled, but it was a sad smile. 35 years. High school history. A pause. But that was another life. I wanted to ask more, so much more, but I glanced at my watch and realized I was already late. "I have to go," I said. "But it was nice talking to you." "God bless you, ma'am," he called after me. "You have a kind heart." I walked away with tears in my eyes, and I couldn't explain why. After that, it became our routine. Every morning I stopped by his bench. Sometimes I had $5, sometimes just the change from my pocket. We started talking, really talking. I learned his name was Robert Davis, 74 years old. He'd taught history at Jefferson High School for 35 years before retiring. His wife Eleanor had passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. He said her name with such tenderness that I recognized the grief immediately. It was the same way I said Bill's name. Over the weeks and months, Robert told me his story in pieces. After Eleanor died, a financial advisor convinced him to invest his entire pension in what was supposed to be a safe retirement fund. The fund collapsed. Every penny gone. Then his apartment building was sold and converted into luxury condos. He couldn't afford the new rent anywhere in the city. The shelter has beds when there's room, he told me one October morning, his breath visible in the cold air. When there isn't, I find somewhere dry to wait until morning. That's not right, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. A man who spent his life teaching children shouldn't be sleeping on the streets. Robert just smiled. The Lord provides, Mrs. Emma. He sent you to me, didn't he? I didn't feel like much of a provision. A few dollars here and there. Some coffee on cold mornings. Conversation to break up his lonely days. But Robert always seemed grateful. He always asked about my life, about my job at the senior center, about my children, about how I was coping with my own loss. Somewhere along the way, he became my friend. Maybe my only real friend in this new life of mine. One rainy morning in late spring, I found Robert hunched over something on the bench, his jacket spread out like a tent. When I got closer, I saw he was sheltering a baby bird that had fallen from a nest, a tiny trembling thing with barely any feathers. He was soaking wet. The bird was dry. "Robert, you're going to catch pneumonia," I said. He looked up at me with those kind eyes. "This little one needed help more than I needed to stay dry. She'll be strong enough to find her way home by afternoon." That's when I truly knew what kind of man Robert Davis was. The world had taken everything from him, and he still had enough left to give to a helpless creature. That's when I started bringing him food from my own kitchen, books from the library, a warmer scarf when winter came. It wasn't charity anymore. It was friendship. 8 months after our first meeting, something changed. It started with a phone call at work. I was at my desk at Good Shepherd filing paperwork and answering phones like I did every day. The center served about 200 elderly clients with day programs, meals, and social activities. The staff was small, just 15 of us, and we all knew each other well. The director was a woman named Victoria Hartwell, 52 years old, elegant, respected. She'd run the place for 12 years, and everyone loved her. The clients trusted her. The staff admired her. I'd never had a reason to think twice about her. The new bookkeeper was a young woman named Jessica Reynolds, 28, with bright red hair and an easy smile. She'd been hired about 3 months ago, and everyone liked her efficient, friendly, always willing to help. I had no reason to suspect either of them. None at all. That afternoon, while Victoria and Jessica were both out, I answered a call from a longtime donor named Dorothy Mitchell. "I'm so confused," Dorothy said. "I received my tax receipt, but the amount doesn't match what I donated. I gave $500, but the receipt says $200. Is there some kind of mistake?" I wrote down all the details in my work journal, a small notebook where I tracked every call and request. Old habit from my teaching days. "I'll look into it, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm sure it's just a clerical error." When Victoria returned, I mentioned the call. She cut me off before I could finish. "That's an accounting matter. Don't worry about it, Jessica will handle it." Her smile was quick, too quick, and something flickered in her eyes that I couldn't quite name. I let it go. What else could I do? I was just the receptionist. 3 weeks later, Harold Barnes asked to speak with me. Harold was 82 years old, a regular at the center who came 3 times a week for the activities. He always sat in the corner with a newspaper, watching everything with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I knew he'd been an FBI investigator before retiring. He'd mentioned it once in passing, but I'd never thought much about it. He waited until the lobby was empty, then gestured me over to his corner. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said quietly, "I've been watching you for a while now. You seem like an honest woman, maybe the only honest person in this building. I'm sorry. Do you know why I sit in this corner every day? Because from here I can see everything. The offices, the hallways, who comes and goes. And what I've seen..." He shook his head. "Something's not right here." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" "I've seen the director meeting with a man after hours, tall, thin, nervous-looking. Not her husband. They argue. She cries. He threatens." Harold leaned closer. "I've seen the bookkeeper leaving in tears. I've seen someone copying pages from your work journal." "My journal?" "That little notebook you write in. Someone photographed the pages when you stepped away from your desk. His eyes locked onto mine. Did you write anything about donations in that journal? I thought about Dorothy Mitchell's call, about the discrepancy I'd noted. Yes, I whispered. I did. Harold nodded slowly. Then you need to be careful, Mrs. Sullivan, because whoever is running this show doesn't want anyone asking questions. He paused. And they've noticed that you've been asking. I walked home that night with my heart pounding. I told myself Harold was just a paranoid old man, a former FBI agent seeing conspiracies where there were none. But when I got to my apartment, my bedroom window was open. The window I knew I had closed that morning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was nothing. A draft, a faulty latch, my own forgetfulness. But somewhere deep in my bones, I knew the truth. Something was very, very wrong. And somehow, without meaning to, I had become part of it. The next morning, I got off the bus at my usual stop just like every other day. The March air was crisp, carrying the last bite of winter, and I pulled my coat tighter as I walked toward the library. Robert was there. But something was different. He wasn't sitting. He was standing, his eyes scanning the street with an urgency I'd never seen before. The moment he spotted me, he rushed forward with a speed that surprised me for a man his age. Emma. He grabbed my arm, his grip firm but gentle. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Robert, what's wrong? Are you hurt? No, it's not about me. He pulled me behind the library wall, away from the stream of morning commuters. It's about you. Something's happening. Something dangerous. My heart began to pound. What are you talking about? Robert looked around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. 2 weeks ago, I noticed a man walking past my bench, twice in 30 minutes. He kept looking at me, not the way most people do, like I'm invisible or something to avoid. He was studying me, like he was trying to figure out if I was a threat. Maybe he was just... I've lived on these streets for 4 years, Emma. You learn to recognize danger. You learn to watch the people who watch you. Robert's eyes were intense. So I started paying attention to him. He told me how he'd followed the man at a distance over several days, how he'd seen him meet with a young woman with red hair, Jessica Reynolds, our bookkeeper, at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, how the conversation had been heated, how Jessica had cried, how the man had grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks. I followed him after that, Robert said. Not because I'm some kind of detective, but because on the streets you learn that dangerous people don't just go away. You need to know where they are. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a battered flip phone, the kind they sold at dollar stores for $20. I bought this at a thrift shop. Took me 2 weeks to save enough. And I've been taking pictures, writing down what I see. He pressed a small notebook into my hands. Last night I heard them talking. The man and another person, a woman. They were on a bench near the park, probably thought no one was around. But I was there. In the shadows. Invisible like always. My hands were trembling. What did they say? Robert's face went gray. They talked about a fire, Emma. They talked about making it look like an electrical accident. And they mentioned your name. They mentioned your apartment. The world tilted. I grabbed the library wall to steady myself. That's insane. Why would anyone want to? I don't know everything yet, but I know enough. Robert gripped my shoulders, forcing me to look into his eyes. Tonight, don't go home. Sleep somewhere else. A hotel, a friend's house. Anywhere, just not your apartment. Robert, this sounds crazy. Maybe you misheard. Emma. His voice cracked. For 1 year, you've been the only person who looked at me like I was still human. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost, forever hope. Do you understand I will not let them take you from this world? Not when I can stop it. His eyes were pleading, desperate, and beneath the urgency I saw something I recognized. Fear. Real fear. The same fear I'd seen in Bill's eyes the morning he collapsed. Promise me, Robert said. Promise me you won't go home tonight. I looked at this man, this homeless man I'd been giving pocket change to for a year, and I saw the truth in his face. Whatever he believed it completely, and he was terrified for me. I promise, I heard myself say. I went to work that day like nothing was wrong. Robert told me I had to. Act normal, he said. Don't ask questions. Don't look at any records. Just do your job and leave. I'll explain everything tomorrow. So I sat at my reception desk, greeting clients and answering phones like I did every day. But everything felt different now. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher. The hallways seemed longer. And every time someone walked past my desk, my heart jumped into my throat. Victoria came out of her office around noon. "Emma, do you have a minute?" I followed her down the hall, my pulse racing. Her office was neat and professional, with framed certificates on the wall and fresh flowers on the desk. She closed the door behind us and gestured for me to sit. "I wanted to give you a heads up," she said, settling into her chair. "We've had some irregularities in our donation records. An auditor will be coming next week to review everything." I kept my face neutral. Irregularities. Nothing major, I'm sure. Probably just clerical errors. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "But there may be questions. Some of the suspicious transactions. They have timestamps that coincide with your shifts." The room felt suddenly cold. "I don't understand. I'm just the receptionist. I don't have access to the financial systems." I know. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. "I'm sure it's nothing. I just wanted to warn you so you're not caught off guard." She paused, and something flickered in her expression, something hard and calculating. "We'll get to the bottom of it. Don't worry." I left her office with my legs trembling. "Don't worry," she'd said. But now I understood exactly what was happening. If something happened to me tonight, if there was a fire, if I died in my sleep, the story would write itself. The receptionist who was stealing from elderly donors, the thief who died before she could be arrested. Case closed. No further investigation needed. Victoria wasn't warning me. She was setting me up. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I took a bus to a budget hotel 2 miles from my apartment. $49 for a room with thin walls and a mattress that had seen better days. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that Robert was just a paranoid old man, that Harold Barnes was seeing conspiracies where there were none. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I lay on the stiff hotel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of traffic outside. I thought about Bill, about the night before he died when he'd held my hand and told me he loved me. I hadn't known those would be the last words. You never know. At 2:17 in the morning, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. For a moment, I almost didn't answer. "Who calls at this hour with good news?" Mrs. Sullivan, a woman's voice. Professional. Serious. "This is Sergeant Rivera with the Minneapolis Police Department. I'm calling about your apartment building." My blood turned to ice. "What about it?" "There's been an incident. A fire. The building has been evacuated. We're trying to account for all residents." A pause. "Ma'am, are you home right now?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. "Ma'am." "No," I whispered. "No, I'm staying somewhere else tonight." "That's very fortunate." The officer's voice was carefully neutral. "The fire started on your floor. Your unit sustained significant damage. The fire investigator says it originated in the bedroom. If anyone had been sleeping there..." She let the sentence hang. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need us to send someone?" "I'm fine," I managed. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. I was sitting in a cheap hotel room, realizing that if I had gone home, if I had climbed into my bed like any other night, I would be dead right now. Robert had saved my life. A homeless man who sat on a bench reading history books. A man the world had thrown away. He had saved me. I hung up the phone and cried until the sun came up. I found Robert at his bench at first light. He was already standing, waiting, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "You're alive," he said, and his voice broke. "Thank God. Thank God." I ran to him and threw my arms around him, something I'd never done before. He held me while I sobbed against his faded green jacket right there on the street while morning commuters walked past without a second glance. "The fire," I finally managed. "How did you know?" Robert pulled back and led me to the bench. He pressed the small notebook into my hands again. "I told you I've been watching, writing everything down." He opened to a page filled with cramped handwriting. 3 weeks of notes, dates, times, descriptions, everything I've seen. He showed me photographs on his cheap flip phone, grainy dark but clear enough to make out faces. Victoria Hartwell sitting with a tall, thin man at a coffee shop. Jessica Reynolds crying outside the senior center. The tall man arguing with Victoria, his finger jabbing at her chest. Who is he? I asked. The man in the photos. That's what I had to find out. Robert turned to another page. I followed him, watched where he went. And then I did something I haven't done in years. I went to the library and used the computers. Looked him up. He handed me a printout, a professional photo from a business website. His name is Daniel Hartwell, Victoria's younger brother. He runs a financial consulting firm called Hartwell Financial. The name hit me like a physical blow. Hartwell Financial, I repeated. Robert, that's the company that stole your pension. Robert nodded slowly, his eyes heavy with years of buried pain. I realized it 3 days ago. When I saw the name on his business card, something clicked. I pulled the old paperwork from my storage locker, the one thing I kept from my old life. And there it was, Daniel Hartwell, the man who convinced me to invest everything, the man who took my future. I stared at him. He's connected to both of us. Not just connected. Robert's voice hardened. He's the one pulling the strings. Victoria isn't running this operation, he is. She's terrified of him. I've seen them together. He threatens her, controls her. Whatever he has on her, it's enough to make her do terrible things. But why? Money. It's always money. Robert flipped to another page of notes. I overheard them talking last week. Daniel owes people, dangerous people. Loan sharks, maybe. He mentioned a number, $800,000, and a deadline. He said if he didn't pay, they would kill him. The pieces began clicking into place. Daniel needed money desperately. He forced Victoria to help him steal from the senior center, and probably from other places too. But something went wrong. Someone started asking questions about donations. Dorothy Mitchell called about her receipt. I wrote it down in my journal, and they decided I knew too much. The fire wasn't about what I knew, I said slowly. It was about what they thought I might figure out, and about having someone to blame. Robert's face was grim. If you died in that fire, they would have pinned the whole fraud on you. Dead woman can't defend herself. Case closed. Everyone moves on. I thought about Victoria in her office warning me about the audit, about suspicious transactions with my timestamps. She had been building the case against me, laying the groundwork for the story they would tell after I was gone. But I wasn't gone. I was still here. And now I knew everything. We have to go to the police, I said. Robert nodded and handed me the notebook and the phone. Everything I've seen is in there, every photo, every note. It's not much, but it's a start. I looked at this man who had lost everything to the same person now trying to destroy me. A man who had spent years on the streets invisible, forgotten with every reason to give up on the world. And instead of giving up, he had spent 3 weeks documenting, protecting a woman who had simply stopped to talk to him every morning. Robert, I said quietly, why did you do all this? You could have just looked the other way. It would have been easier. He was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph, a beautiful black woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. My Eleanor, he said softly. The day before she died, she made me promise something. She said, Robert, don't let this world make you hard. Find a way to help someone. That's how you'll find yourself again. He tucked the photo back into his pocket. For 6 years, I sat on that bench wondering how I could keep that promise. I had nothing to give, nothing to offer. And then you came along. His voice caught. You saw me, Emma. You stopped. You talked to me like I mattered. And I realized maybe I did still have something to give. Maybe I could still make a difference. I reached out and took his weathered hand in mine. You saved my life, Robert. He squeezed my fingers gently. No, Emma. We saved each other. The Minneapolis Police Department headquarters smelled like burned coffee and bureaucracy. Robert and I sat in plastic chairs outside Detective James Morrison's office waiting to be called in. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. They won't believe us, I whispered. A widow and a homeless man accusing the director of a respected senior center. They'll think we're crazy. Robert placed his hand over mine. We have evidence. We have the truth. That has to count for something. Detective Morrison was 45 with tired eyes and a skeptical expression that probably came standard with the badge. When we sat down across from his cluttered desk, he looked at Robert's worn clothes and my nervous fidgeting, and I could see him making judgments. So let me get this straight, he said, flipping through Robert's notebook. You're telling me that you, a homeless man, spent 3 weeks conducting surveillance on a financial consultant and a senior center director, and you have evidence of fraud and attempted murder. That's correct, Robert said calmly. Morrison leaned back in his chair. And why exactly should I believe any of this? Before I could answer, a voice came from the doorway. Because I can corroborate it. We turned to see Harold Barnes standing there leaning on his cane, a manila folder tucked under his arm. The old FBI agent walked in without waiting for an invitation and dropped the folder on Morrison's desk. Harold Barnes, retired FBI, 32 years, badge number 44471 if you want to check. He settled into the chair beside me. I've been watching the same people Mr. Davis has been watching. Different angle, same conclusions. Morrison's expression shifted. He opened Harold's folder and began reading. I caught glimpses of typed notes, printed photographs, highlighted financial documents. I may be old, Harold continued, but my eyes still work fine, and what I've seen at Good Shepherd Senior Center is textbook fraud. Multiple donors reporting discrepancies between their contributions and their tax receipts, money being funneled through shell accounts, and a director who's clearly operating under duress. Morrison looked up. Under duress? Victoria Hartwell isn't the mastermind. She's a puppet. Harold tapped a photograph in his folder. Her brother Daniel is pulling the strings. He's got something on her, something bad enough to make her risk everything. My guess is blackmail. For the next hour, Morrison listened. He examined Robert's photographs, read through his meticulous notes, compared them with Harold's independent observations. He made phone calls. He pulled up records on his computer, and slowly his skepticism began to crack. The fire at your apartment, he said, finally looking at me. The investigator's preliminary report says it was arson. Accelerant was found near the bedroom. Someone wanted that fire to look electrical, but they were sloppy. My stomach turned. They really tried to kill me. It appears so. Morrison closed the folders and stood up. I'm going to bring in our financial crimes unit. This is bigger than a local fraud case. If what you're telling me is true, Daniel Hartwell has been running this scheme across multiple facilities for years. He looked at Robert with something approaching respect. Mr. Davis, your documentation is remarkably thorough. Most trained investigators don't take notes this detailed. Robert allowed himself a small smile. I was a history teacher for 35 years, Detective. If there's one thing I learned, it's that the truth lives in the details. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, federal auditors descended on Good Shepherd. They seized computers, financial records, donation logs. They interviewed staff. They traced money through a maze of accounts that led straight to Daniel Hartwell. What they found was staggering. Daniel had been running the same scheme at 4 different senior centers across Minnesota. Over 7 years, he had stolen more than $3 million money donated by families to help their elderly loved ones. Money meant for meals for medical care for dignity in old age. He had used his sister Victoria as a front, threatening to reveal a secret she had kept hidden for nearly 30 years, that her daughter Jessica was born from an affair, not from her marriage. The truth would have destroyed Victoria's family, her reputation, everything she had built. So she became his accomplice. Jessica Reynolds, the bookkeeper, was Victoria's daughter, not her niece, as everyone believed. She was 3 months pregnant and terrified. Daniel had threatened to expose the truth about her parentage if she didn't help cook the books. She had been crying every night, trapped between her mother's desperate pleas and her uncle's cruel demands. The man who set fire to my apartment was a hired criminal named Marcus Webb. When police arrested him, he gave up everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. He told them exactly who had paid him, exactly what he was told to do, exactly how much my life was worth to Daniel Hartwell. $5,000. That was the price on my head. Less than the cost of a used car. Victoria was arrested at her home on a Wednesday morning, still in her bathrobe. According to the officers who were there, she didn't resist. She just sat down on her front steps and cried. Daniel tried to run. He made it as far as the airport before federal marshals caught him at the security checkpoint. He was carrying a one-way ticket to Mexico and a briefcase full of cash. Jessica turned state's witness. She was given immunity in exchange for her testimony, a decision that would save both her and her unborn child from prison. The wheels of justice, once they started turning, moved with surprising speed. The trial began 3 months later in the Hennepin County Courthouse. I was called as a witness on the second day. I told the jury everything about Dorothy Mitchell's phone call, about my work journal, about the night I spent in a hotel while my apartment burned. My voice shook, but I made it through. But the moment everyone would remember, the moment that made the evening news and went viral on social media, came when they called Robert Davis to the stand. He walked to the witness box with his back straight, wearing a borrowed suit and a tie that was slightly out of fashion. He looked like what he was, a teacher, a man who had spent his life shaping young minds, a man the world had discarded but could not diminish. "Mr. Davis," the prosecutor began, "can you describe your circumstances before you became homeless?" Robert folded his hands in his lap. "I taught history at Jefferson High School for 35 years. I had over 3,000 students in that time. I tried to teach them about justice, about how ordinary people can change the course of history if they have the courage to stand up for what's right." "And what happened to change your circumstances?" "My wife Eleanor was diagnosed with cancer 6 years ago. A few months before that, I was approached by a financial advisor who convinced me to invest my entire pension in what he called a guaranteed retirement fund." Robert paused. "That advisor was Daniel Hartwell." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Robert's eyes found Daniel at the defense table. The two men stared at each other across 30 feet of polished wood and 6 years of stolen life. "The fund collapsed," Robert continued. "Every penny I had saved over 35 years of teaching gone. When my wife got sick, we couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved her. We couldn't afford the specialists. We could barely afford the hospice care that let her die with some small measure of dignity." His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "Eleanor passed away in a small apartment holding my hand because a man in that chair decided that his gambling debts were more important than our future. I lost my wife. I lost my home. I lost everything. For 4 years I slept on benches and in shelters, wondering what I had done to deserve such a fate." The jury was silent. Several members were wiping their eyes. "But then something happened," Robert said. "One morning a woman stopped at my bench. She gave me $5 and asked about the book I was reading. She didn't look through me like I wasn't there. She saw me. She talked to me. She treated me like a human being." He looked at me sitting in the gallery, and I felt tears streaming down my face. "For 1 year, Emma Sullivan gave me back something I thought I had lost forever, my sense of purpose, my belief that I still mattered. And when I discovered that the same man who destroyed my life was trying to destroy hers, I knew what I had to do." Robert turned back to the jury. "I spent 35 years teaching students about the heroes in history books, the ones who stood up against injustice, even when the odds were against them. I never thought I would have the chance to become one of those people. But Eleanor used to tell me that life gives you unexpected opportunities. You just have to be brave enough to take them." He straightened his borrowed tie. "I am 74 years old. I have nothing, no home, no savings, no family left. But I have my integrity, I have my word, and I have the truth. That man," he pointed at Daniel Hartwell, "took everything from me. He tried to take everything from Emma Sullivan, and he took millions from elderly people across this state who trusted him with their futures." Robert's voice rose strong and clear, filling the courtroom. "I may be homeless, I may be old, I may be invisible to most of the world, but I am still a teacher. And today I am teaching one final lesson, that justice does not belong only to the powerful. It belongs to all of us, even the ones society has forgotten." The courtroom was completely silent. Then, from somewhere in the gallery, someone began to clap. Others joined. Within seconds, the judge was banging her gavel, calling for order, but the applause continued, a wave of recognition for a man who had refused to let the world break him. Daniel Hartwell stared at the table in front of him, his face pale, his hands trembling. He knew it was over. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Daniel Hartwell guilty on all counts. 25 years in federal prison. Victoria Hartwell guilty with a reduced sentence for cooperation. 8 years. Marcus Webb, the arsonist, 15 years for attempted murder. Jessica Reynolds received probation and community service. The judge took into account her pregnancy, her cooperation, and the duress she had been under. She broke down sobbing when the verdict was read, tears of relief, I think, more than anything else. After the trial, reporters surrounded Robert on the courthouse steps. They wanted his story. They wanted to know how a homeless man had brought down a criminal empire. But Robert just shook his head and walked away. He found me standing by the bus stop, and we left together two invisible people who had somehow changed everything. 1 week later, I visited Robert in the hospital. The stress of the trial had taken its toll on his body. Years of untreated diabetes, malnutrition, and sleeping in the cold had finally caught up with him. His kidneys were failing. The doctors said he needed surgery, but without insurance, the bills would be astronomical. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand, watching the monitors beep their steady rhythm. "Emma," he said weakly, "there's something I need to tell you." "Robert, you should rest." "No." His grip tightened. "I need you to know the real reason I did what I did. The real reason I couldn't let them hurt you." I waited. When Eleanor got sick, the doctors said there were treatments that might have given her more time. Experimental therapies, specialists in other cities. But we couldn't afford any of it. His voice broke. We had just lost everything. Every penny. All because I trusted the wrong person. Tears slid down his weathered cheeks. "She died 2 months after the money disappeared. 2 months, Emma. If we'd had our savings, maybe she would have had a chance. Maybe she would have fought a little longer. Maybe I would have had 1 more year with her. 1 more month. 1 more day." I squeezed his hand, my own tears falling freely. The last thing Eleanor said to me, the very last thing, was, "Robert, don't let this destroy you. Find someone to help. That's how you'll find your way back to yourself." He looked at me with those warm brown eyes, the same eyes that had first caught my attention on that bench outside the library. For 6 years I sat on that bench trying to understand what she meant. How could I help anyone when I had nothing? How could I find myself when I had lost everything? He took a shaky breath. "Then you came along, and I finally understood." "Understood what?" "That helping you wasn't just about saving your life. It was about saving mine. It was about keeping my promise to Eleanor." He smiled through his tears. "You gave me purpose again, Emma. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning. And when I had the chance to protect you, I wasn't just protecting a friend. I was proving that my life still meant something. That all those years of teaching weren't wasted. That I could still make a difference." I leaned forward and hugged him, this fragile man in a hospital gown, this hero in borrowed clothes. "We saved each other," I whispered. "That's what you told me, and you were right." The story didn't end in that hospital room. The media coverage of the trial sparked something unexpected. Donations poured in for Robert, enough to cover his surgery, his medical bills, and a small apartment of his own. A civil rights lawyer took his case pro bono and began fighting to recover his lost pension from Daniel Hartwell's seized assets. The school district where Robert had taught for 35 years organized a ceremony in his honor. Former students, now doctors, teachers, lawyers, parents, came from across the country to see their old history teacher. They created a scholarship in his name. They told stories about how he had changed their lives. Robert cried through the whole thing. 1 year later, I knocked on the door of a small apartment on the 2nd floor of a quiet building on Oak Street. Robert opened it with a smile, looking healthier than I had ever seen him. Behind him, I could see bookshelves lined with history books, photographs on the walls, a small dining table set for 2. "Emma, come in, come in." On the wall beside his reading chair, I saw 2 photographs. One was Eleanor, the same worn photo he used to carry in his pocket, now properly framed. The other was a picture of me and Robert on the courthouse steps, taken the day Daniel Hartwell was sentenced. At the table, a young boy sat with a textbook open in front of him. "This is Marcus," Robert said. "He lives downstairs. His mother works 2 jobs, so I help him with his homework after school." The boy looked up and grinned. "Mr. Davis is teaching me about the civil rights movement. Did you know that Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to refuse to give up her seat on a bus?" I smiled. "Is that so?" "Her name was Claudette Colvin. She was only 15 years old, but she was brave." Marcus looked at Robert with admiration. "Mr. Davis says history is full of heroes nobody remembers, but that doesn't make them any less important." I looked at Robert, this man who had been invisible to the world, now shaping another generation of young minds. "No," I said softly, "it doesn't." We had coffee together that afternoon, not on a bench, not through a paper cup, but at a real table in a real home like the friends we had become. "You know what Eleanor would say if she could see all this?" Robert asked, gazing out the window at the afternoon sun. What she would say that God works in mysterious ways. He smiled. She would say that sometimes the smallest ripple can become the biggest wave. I thought about that first morning. $5, a question about a book, a moment of human connection in a world that had made us both invisible. She would be proud of you, Robert. She would be proud of both of us. People sometimes ask me what I learned from everything that happened. They expect me to talk about crime and corruption, about the dangers hiding in ordinary places, about how you never really know who to trust. But that's not what I learned. What I learned is this: kindness matters. Every single act, no matter how small, every time you stop instead of walking by, every time you look someone in the eye, every time you treat another person with dignity and respect, you never know whose life you might be saving, or whose life might save yours. Robert Davis was a homeless man on a bench. I was a lonely widow with pocket change to spare. Together we brought down a criminal empire, sent 4 people to prison, recovered millions of stolen dollars, and built a friendship that will last for the rest of our lives. All because I stopped one morning and dropped $5 in a paper cup. So here's my advice to you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Be kind. Stop for the person everyone else walks past. Take a moment to see the humanity in people who have been made invisible by their circumstances, because kindness creates ripples, and ripples become waves, and waves can change the world.